Moving on and looking at the groups, the bodies that are involved in the actual standard setting process. We know who's involved in the setting of company law, that's government. We know who's involved in setting the stock exchange listing requirements, that's the securities commissions, as we'll see in a couple of minutes' time. Actually, there's a bit on that. This bit of the regulatory framework is who are the groups that are responsible for actually developing and implementing the accounting standards. And the first body we look at is the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. Yep, the IFRS Foundation. The IFRS Foundation is a not-for-profit organisation, and it is responsible for the overall process. It develops, produces and promotes IFRS. So it has, as we see, responsible for overall process. It have a sort of monitoring and oversight role. It does not get involved in the detailed setting of the standards. Okay, it delegates that to somebody else. So a key thing about the IFRS Foundation is that it does not get involved in any detailed technical knowledge, implementation, anything like that. It's an oversight body. The IFRS Foundation actually delegates them all of the work and just keeps the oversight to 3 sort of subcommittees or subgroups. First of all, there is the Standards Advisory Council, the IFRS Advisory Council. Secondly, there is the ISB, the International Accounting Standards Board. And thirdly, there is the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, Interpretations Committee. You will see them referred to as being the Advisory Council, the Interpretations Committee. The IFRS bit is effectively dropped off of the front. The clue's in the name for most of these. The Advisory Council advises. The Advisory Council suggests areas that require new accounting standards, or areas where the accounting standards at the moment don't work very well and they need updating. So they give advice as to what should be done. The International Accounting Standards Board takes that advice on board and either produces a new accounting standard or makes some amendments and some changes to an existing one. The Interpretations Committee are then responsible for providing feedback to the Accounting Standards Board on how easy it is to implement the new standard, whether or not it improves the processes. So there's a link here. There's this sort of cyclical process. It's almost a virtuous circle, isn't it? Because we have the Advisory Council that suggests things that need to be done. The Accounting Standards Board do it, or does them. The Interpretation Committee give feedback on how well they're being done, and that will feed back to the Advisory Council, who will then say that accounting standard needs changing again or it doesn't. So that's the way that things work. And you do sometimes in exams get what is the role of this particular body. So they're the main areas. Remember, the foundation has overall responsibility for monitoring and controlling all 3 of the ones you can see on this slide. A little bit of additional consideration for the regulatory framework. There is IOSCO, the International Organisation of Securities Commission, which is referred to as IOSCO. Incidentally, I don't think you'll ever get a question that asks you what abbreviations stand for. IOSCO regulates the capital markets. The capital markets are the stock exchanges where shares are traded, are bought and sold. And it will make sure and regulate that the companies that are on those markets are doing things properly. You need to be listed. You need to sort of apply to be able to sell your shares on one of these markets, and you have to comply with certain regulations in order to do so, and IOSCO will make sure that that is done. I would say the role of IOSCO is a little bit incidental in exam terms, not in the real world, but certainly in exam terms. Having a look at a regulatory framework question. Which of the following is the main purpose of the IFRS Foundation? A, they provide advice to the ISB. B, they give feedback to the ISB on the issued standards, the issued IFRS. Or C, they are directly responsible for the technical input into the IFRS. D, they're responsible for the overall process of developing, producing and promoting IFRS. Well, the answer here is D, isn't it? The overall responsibility for the entire process is what the foundation does. A, giving advice was the role of the advisory council. B is the role of the interpretations committee, giving feedback. And C, technical input, is the role of the ISB themselves. Make sure that you're happy that you know exactly what each of those boards or bodies are responsible for. We then go on and have a look at the standard setting process itself. So the Accounting Standards Board will produce an accounting standard with the help of the Advisory Council and with the help of the Interpretations Committee. There are 4 steps and stages that are followed. The life cycle, the timeline of an accounting standard. The first thing that we have is an issues paper. The second thing that we have is a discussion paper. The third and fourth will become clear when we get down the bottom of the screen. So the issues paper produced by the Advisory Council has the contentious points in it, the things that aren't working very well. This is what we need to deal with. Discussion paper is then produced by the ISB that has initial ideas, suggestions for change. And as we've seen already, that could be suggestions for a new accounting standard or changes to an existing one. That discussion paper then will go to the Interpretations Committee and there will be some public comment on it. Maybe some large companies will have a little bit of feedback into whether or not the ideas are appropriate. So issues paper, discussion paper. Once the discussion paper has been sort of finalised, then an exposure draft is created, and an exposure draft is a provisional financial reporting standard. That exposure draft will have more detail in it than a discussion paper, so it will include some numerical examples. A lot of standards will be changed, and as a result of the changes, the computations will be done in a different way, and some illustrations of that will be included in the exposure draft, and maybe some illustrations as to what any additional disclosures might be that are required, some additional narrative information as well. That then goes to the Interpretations Committee. They get feedback on it. It then comes back to the IFRS, the ISB, and the IFRS is actually produced, which is the published financial document. So the order is as follows: issues paper, discussion paper, exposure draft, IFRS, and then we have our new accounting standard. Standard setting process question. Let's pretend we haven't just seen the previous slide, and please do not look back at it. Which of the following is the correct order for the standard setting process? Now, this should be a really, really easy question to be able to answer in the examination. You just spend a tiny little bit of time, 5 minutes maybe, learning the order. This should be an easy question. Is it A, discussion paper, IFRS, issue paper, exposure draft? You should probably be able to dismiss that one because the IFRS goes at the end, doesn't it? B, issue paper, exposure draft, discussion paper, IFRS. Well, at least the IFRS is at the end of that one, so that's a start. C, issue paper, discussion paper, IFRS, exposure draft. Well, the IFRS is not at the end of that one, so that's not going to be the right answer. D, issue paper, discussion paper, exposure draft, IFRS. Well, that's the right one, isn't it? Looking at the answer is D. Issue paper comes first, IFRS comes last. Remember those two. Remember the first and the last. The issue paper is the first thing, the IFRS is the last thing, and if you're ever in any doubt as to what comes first between the exposure draft and the discussion paper, just think of the way the alphabet works. A, B, C, D, E. Discussion, exposure. Discussion paper comes before exposure draft. That should be a nice easy way of remembering it. So that's the end of the regulation. Just to summarise what we've done so far. In this chapter we've looked at regulation. We will also go on in the next one and look at the ethical framework, and we will go on and look at corporate governance as well. Remember what we said at the beginning. Regulation is one sort of area. Ethics is the second one, and ethics is split into individuals ethics, which is the ethical framework, and company ethics, which is the code of corporate governance. So that's the end of the first recording.